Talking about Trayvon Martin and the way the case has unfolded, particularly I think in the media this week, in which we've seen this kind of polarization happening. And Kai, you wrote about the sort of way in which his character assassination and this kind of presumption of guilt, right, that has sort of entered the picture. And I think it's really interesting in terms of the way we think about this fight that was happening over the photos, right? What photos are you showing him? What is the real side of Trayvon Martin? Again, like I said, completely immaterial, of course, to what happened on that night and whether he deserved to get shot.
I've actually been surprised over the past couple of weeks because I've written a couple of pieces taking the same line on this that I think most people have, which is that George Zimmerman basically has blood on his hands no matter what the details turn out to be. Very ordinary columns. And of course, usually as the person who's known in some quarters as controversial on race, what I'm used to is getting mean mail from some black people. You know, I don't know what color I am and all that. Right. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been getting a lot of hate mail from white people telling me that I am convicting George Zimmerman and that I am an anti-racist myself. And I've been told by many people that I ought to be ashamed of myself for writing in defense of Trayvon. So clearly there's something going on here that is rather regrettable in terms of how this is being processed by a lot of the country.
Yeah, and it also brings out this point of like the way in which that in the current environment and the internet, like it can just be a sewer, right? I mean, and there's certain things kind of will strike a chord. And then even when I saw the news about the Klan hacked his email, I was like, what century, what universe do we live in? The Klan hacked his email. Like trying to even like figure out processing that sentence.
In 2012.
Yeah, and the fact, and Ta-Nehisi Coates had the great point about the sort of way in which all of it is sort of being structured to eat away at the empathy people naturally feel, right? And I think that's what's so interesting, is that the first impulse people have is empathy for a dead 17-year-old boy. And then all this stuff has to be brought in. Oh, show his social media account, show him, you know, fooling around with a 17-year-old friends to make him into something else, right? To make him into something that looks menacing and threatening. Right, Rich?
Right, very much so. I think there's that element to dehumanize him and make him look like a criminal so that people call in that fear within themselves of black men. However, we should point out, I think, that I'm reminded of Joe Wilson and Valerie Plame, the same way that when they challenged power in this country, it was an immediate smackdown. There was character assassination against both of them. And so I think there are two things going on here. One is the polarization you were talking about, Chris, but the second thing is that's the tactic, is to dehumanize him and to make him look like a criminal.
Well, and then there's also the, yeah, please, Kai.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I think part of it is that, you know, the case opened up a bunch of structural questions, right, about gun laws and about the way the criminal justice system works.
Stand your ground.
It opened up a bunch of structural questions, and one of the things we see, I think, particularly when race is involved, but for a whole lot of stuff, is that if you can keep it about individuals,
yes,
you don't get to the structural thing.
Yes.
And so making it a fight about whether or not George Zimmerman is or is not a bad person and whether or not Trayvon is or is not a bad person prevents a conversation about the structures that are.
And clearly we need to have a conversation. We don't live in a post-racial dream world. It has showed some deep scars in our country and the need for a national debate and national action in this area. My good friend in Congress and housemate, Frederica Wilson, represented him. She knew him. She described him as the sweetest.
You're saying Trayvon Martin?
Yes. She said he was the sweetest, kindest young man, that he babysat. She has a huge family. He babysat for all of the children in the family. He called them his little bunnies. He has two outstanding brothers. The mother works for HUD. The father's outstanding. And it certainly shows that a young man or woman should be able to walk the streets to see a friend or buy something at the store without being assaulted. I was part of a neighborhood patrol in my block association for young people walking home after school. We weren't carrying guns.
Right.
We were just out on the street to make sure that people got home correctly. And I would say, if you think something's wrong, you call the police.
Right.
And the police was telling him not to do anything. Right. So she is distressed beyond words, and I think the whole nation is, and we have to take action.
You raise a really good point on this gun issue, because I think the law that we've all focused on, first of all, I want to get back to what you said quickly, Kai, which is this this idea about the individual versus sort of structural part of this story. And I think one of the things that happened last week is we've all been baited into essentially litigating, trying the case on the facts. And we don't have the facts, right? So now it's, oh, here's the video, and it contests it contests the family members of Zimmerman's account. The family members of Zimmerman are going, all over cable news to say their side of the story, although there's no way to confirm or deny it. All of this vacuum is created by the fact that there is the way that we establish facts in this country is we have an arrest and a trial, right? So all of this is flowing into the vacuum that has been created by the absence of the legal process, which is the way that we deal with this, right? I mean, he can go before a jury, he can go before, and say all of these things, right? But instead it's being tried in the media. And I think the other point here about the not having a gun, I think, is such an important one, because we have focused on the stand your ground laws. But even broader than that are the concealed carry laws, which basically almost every state in the union has some version of, right? That you can walk around with a gun. And in the era of post-Heller jurisprudence on the court, that's essentially a constitutional right, to be able to go anywhere you want with a gun.
That's outrageous. It passed the House in November. And we have good gun control laws in New York and other states like Arizona where they have lax laws. The amount of gun violence is higher. In fact, since they did this stand your ground law, crime and gun violence has gone up 300% in Florida.
That's so justified homicides have gone up almost 3 times, right?
Yeah. So it's outrageous, but to think that Arizona can come into New York with their guns is just outrageous.
Describe that for a second. There's federal legislation pending, right, which is about the reciprocity principle, right? That would allow essentially people with concealed carry in one state to concealed carry in another state.
Right, exactly. And it has passed the House of Representatives. It's an outrageous law. It hasn't passed the Senate, and it shouldn't.
The gun carrying aspect is one of 2 things we know about the case that transcends all of the grimy individual aspects of those 2 people, and that we don't need to really argue about, even if we don't know the details, which is that 1, Trayvon would still be alive if a gun hadn't been involved. Suppose the 2 of them had fisticuffs. That would have been a very different story. But instead we had the guns. And 2, the fact of the matter is that whatever Trayvon was like or wasn't, whatever George Zimmerman was like or wasn't, the fact is that he shouldn't have stopped that boy at all. And the reason the boy was stopped was because of the color of his skin. To the extent that anybody thinks that Trayvon's tweets or whether George Zimmerman is a racist is more interesting, it means that we've got a crazy media, and also people who really are...
How dare you?
Except you, Chris.
Yes, right.
And people
all present company included.
And also people who are under the impression, this is a line I don't take, people are thinking we are post-racial, or it will be nice if we were, so why can't we look at them as individuals, when the fact is that we're not completely post-racial. We're more so than I think people think. But the fact is that kid would not be dead if he weren't black. That has to be talked about. And to the extent that it isn't, something is very seriously wrong.
And there's something even deeper, I think, in the social psychology here, which is why we're getting very quickly to this kind of like inflamed, polarized emotional bedrock, is because it has at the core this sort of this center of racial suspicion, right? Of paranoia, of vigilantism, of the idea that you need to be armed to defend yourself from the other. And that's something that goes all the way back in American history. That has a long lineage in terms of the social foundation. You wrote a really interesting piece about how that manifests today in the New York Times. I want to talk about that right